I'm Nicola Henderson. I'm the Heritage Specialist for XpoNorth and the Innovation and Network Manager for Museums in Heritage Highland, which is a network organisation working with museums and heritage organisations across the region, supporting them to innovate for a more sustainable future. And XpoNorth Heritage is a year-round programme that was launched in February 2020 to work with museums and heritage organisations to help them develop new products, new innovations, new ideas that would help them be more resilient. Within weeks of launching last year, we were in a very different landscape to where we thought we would be, and our focus was very much on upskilling and supporting museums to take their work online so that they could both keep connected to their local existing audiences and their volunteers, while capitalising on the opportunities presented in relation to connecting their collections and stories to a global audience. As we emerge from the pandemic, the sector is considering both how it can develop and build a hybrid model of working, while also exploring new income streams in what is becoming a very, very challenging world. And this session is going to take a look at the role that merchandising and retail could play in helping to build a more secure future for the sector. Even before the pandemic started, heritage retailers were having to become increasingly savvy, competing with local high street shops, growing online giants, increasing customer expectations, and increasing pressure to generate income for their museums in what was already a very challenging funding field. A museum shop now has to take centre stage and be a front-facing and vital part of the whole visitor experience. To help us unpick the challenges and opportunities for museums, I'm delighted to be joined today by Jo Prosser, Director of Audience and Experience at the Royal Academy of Arts, Martin Hughes, Operations and Estate Manager in Inverewe Gardens and Corrie Gorge, and Alison Acampero, Art Sales and Commercial Content Lead at the Royal Academy of Arts. So for this panel session today, we would love you all to get involved. So please do submit your questions via the Q&A at the bottom. I'll keep an eye on that throughout the session, but we also have a dedicated section at the end to answer all those questions. So just before we kick off, I'd like to invite the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do and their background, and also why they are passionate about museums. And if I could come to Jo first.
Good morning. Thanks, Nicola, and thank you everyone for attending. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I am currently Director of Audience and Experience at the Royal Academy of Arts, but my roots and my career have really been through the commercial side, and particularly shops of museums and galleries for a long, long time. I'm Scottish, I'm from Edinburgh. I started at the National Galleries of Scotland many moons ago. And I have since worked extensively across the sector, particularly at the V&A, where I was the commercial director for many years, and then at the Met in New York. Why I love museums, when Nicola asked me that earlier, I said I'm not loving them much this morning. I think that's probably the answer. They're never the same. Things change constantly. You have such an enormously varied job and set of colleagues, and most importantly, audience. And I think if you have any interest in the world that we are in and come from, and the people who are in it and have always been part of it and made it, then museums is the only place to be. So that's me.
Thank you, Jo. Alison.
Hi, thanks Nicola, and thanks also XpoNorth and everybody for joining. I'm Alison, and I am currently working at the Royal Academy of Arts as the art sales lead, and look after the commercial content stream as well. My background is in history of art and material studies, very actually quite technical. I then was really interested in kind of the business of the art world, and museums are a part of that, very big part of that. I started working at the V&A, is where I met Jo. I since went on to work a few years later in my own consultancy and delivering projects for V&A Dundee and the V&A in South Kensington, amongst retail projects, so it's kind of non-museum retail projects. So that's a bit about me and why I love museums. I think it's all about the inspiration. I think they're inspirational spaces, they're inspirational in their stories and their objects, whatever there is in the collection. I think working in museums is inspirational. I think visiting museums is inspirational, so very important.
Thanks. Good answer. Excuse me. I am Martin.
Good morning, Nicola. Thanks very much for inviting me along today. And good morning, Joe and Alison. A wee bit of my background, I had over 20 years in commercial retail, and I got the great opportunity 4 years ago to join the National Trust for Scotland and develop their retail shops. And I had the great pleasure of looking after Culloden, Glencoe, Glenfinnan, Inverview and Brodie Castle as my sites. So it was absolutely wonderful. I'm now operations manager for Inverview Garden and Coruscant Gorge, which again is a lovely part of the world to look after. Museums for me, I just love it because I can get to switch off. Everything that's happening in the world out there just seems to disappear, and I can just switch off from the shopping and the bills getting paid. And for me, it's an experience to just turn everything off in this brain and just be focusing everything that's around me. So museums for me are a wonderful place to forget about everyday life and just learn something new. So for that reason, I love being able to switch off.
Great, getting lost and learning. I like that, just strolling around. So let's just get stuck into some questions. I'd like us to start with where we are now. We're emerging from the most disruptive year in recent history for the museum sector, and just really that very basic question of where are we right now in terms of as we emerge from COVID, etc. So if I could come to you, Martin, first on that.
Thanks, Nicola. Where are we now? I don't want to start doom and gloom, but I'll say it's tough. It's really tough out there at the minute. Many of our shops obviously didn't open at all last season, and they're opening up for the first time. So technically they could be opening up with 2019 stock in 2021, which is just crazy when you think about it. But I think the where are we now, the banner for me is people. That's exactly where we are right now. If you go into any of our shops at the moment, we're still socially distancing. We've got colleagues with masks on, we've got customers with masks on, we've removed gondolas and walkways in certain shops to make it easier for our customers to go around, but we're still, people-wise, in a very new environment for retail, which is with us, and we're socially distancing. So as we know, dwell time is so important in retail, and I think at the moment we still have that differentness about retail at the minute in any heritage environment, but it's our people and our customers that are coming in. It's slightly different at the moment. So to answer your question, I just think it's tough out there at the moment. It really is. We aren't back to normal yet, and we still have so many challenges. And as I said, for me, it's all about people at the minute.
Yeah. Alison, do you want to come in there?
I think that's so true. I think something that we mentioned when we spoke before is also resourcing and kind of people and availability being challenging too. I think stepping away from the people part and thinking about the kind of retail and almost omni-channel challenge and opportunity there. But I think it's quite easy to say last year was difficult physically, in terms of physical spaces, so turn to digital, but actually how difficult that is. And it still takes resource, it doesn't just happen. And I think that people who weren't necessarily already established digitally in terms of retail had a real challenge there and are having still, I think, a challenge there. So I'd say, that pivot is an opportunity, but also a challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a more sterile space that people are in that's not quite as friendly that you maybe want to dwell in anymore. Do you have anything to add, sort of, Joe, before we move on to the next?
I suppose, a word that you say we're emerging, and I think it is that point. It's not, we're not still in the depths of it. We haven't found whatever anyone's going to call a new normal or whatever. And it is an uncertainty. I suppose the positive I would put on that, and I would want to say, and I'd be really interested to hear what more of people attending and with us today would think, is that the kind of plus side is there's no right way. I think there's not, we're all learning. And I think it's very, very specific to where you are. The kinds of people who are visiting you, they all have different opinions. There's no one right way. And I actually find that quite empowering in a way. The word that I would use a lot at the moment is listening to the staff, listening to the visitor, listening to that interaction and not worrying too much about what somebody else is doing, what another gallery is doing, but just thinking what works for us right now. And at the risk of sounding a bit cheesy, being quite kind to ourselves and saying, we're all trying to get through this. So we're spending a lot of time with front of house staff, which I look after beyond retail, but I think lots of others will do too. And just saying, it's okay, there isn't a right way. Let's work through this together. And Monday might be awful, but Tuesday could be good. So I think that listening and the fact that there's no certain way would be where I am at this point in emerging.
Yeah, I think that's really important around kindness as well. We know that we have a lot of volunteers that are coming back for the first time, and this is a whole new, and they're learning new skills, and they have a natural anxiety as well. So just that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And impact, just saying it's fine. None of us are quite sure, but we can look after each other. And this may sound mad from a commercial director, but the money will come if we get the confidence up and just slowly build that's the way to do it. I'd say softly.
Thank you. So taking all of that sort of into consideration, and as we've just been saying, our organisations were closed for substantial periods last year. Our volunteers haven't been back. Some of our organisations up here haven't been open since October 2019, or just reopening this month of June. And so as well as all the anxieties that builds up, it's obviously had an impact on income as well, through visitors not paying to either go if the museum has a charge itself or into their retail spaces. So the question of how museums can look to generate income from new sources is what everyone's thinking about just now. So what are your thoughts on the role that retail can play in a museum bounce back and helping to build a bit more of a sustainable future? And go to you, Joe, first this time.
Well, it's a huge question, and I think probably in common with lots of others, before we start getting back to money, there's making money. There's quite a lot of clawing back, and huge losses. Some of us have been able to take advantage of furlough schemes and things like that, but that loss of what, as you rightly said earlier, was already an extremely challenging business is step one. And I think that's something that we collectively need to acknowledge. I think it's going to be quite a challenge. We're having quite a lot of staff and visitors saying, as things ease, can we start doing this again? Can we start doing that again? And I think that the easing of the pressure in terms of COVID distancing and guidelines is not the same as the easing of the financial pressure. Those things will come back at slightly different times. So I suppose I'd start by saying, it's going to be a while before we all get back into the healthy black, I guess. But what I would say is that I think retail can be a hugely important part of that. It's familiar, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's safe. We've missed it. And I think lots of people are telling me that, they're seeing great spends and conversions, as are we, because people like being back. So I think that familiar and it just being something that people valued and remember is incredibly important. I also think, as Alison says, with digital and all of the opportunities that we've had to just basically think while we've been closed, I think we've got much better at not having to be tied into the detail of every piece of programming and the kind of beat of the museum as a whole, and really think about what retail stories we can tell. So I suppose in short, I would say the enjoyment will lead to the revenue and the familiar, and also just thinking of new ways to reconnect and new ways to tell the story, I think, by whatever channel.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Alison?
I think a lot of what you were saying, Joe, resonates with me in terms of the opportunity there to really kind of tell your story. And I think retail fits into the holistic kind of picture there in a museum, in any context, but I think in a museum context, particularly, it's this kind of, it is a part, and it's a very important part of what museums have become and need to be, actually, particularly around financials and sustainability. So I think, yeah, I agree. I think opportunity around the storytelling and the importance of extending the story beyond the museum exhibitions and collections, thinking outside of that, broadening that out.
And I think not feeling you have to do it all at once. You know, I think we all know that feeling of when everything's firing and you're like, God, this is just great, everything's working. You know, there are times when you don't have to do that. And I think being brave enough and confident enough to start slow and say, it's okay, you know, we're just doing this. I mean, I think a lot of us are having this with our catering offers as well, but you can go slow and steady and thoughtful. And I think that's fine. I think people understand that, and we're all gradually building up. So those stories can be, you know, quite modest to start with.
I think that's true right across the museum enterprise. I know that when we first went into lockdown last year, people rushed to get content out, but some of the museums that had the confidence to wait and build up are the ones that really produce some really, really great and engaging stuff.
Yeah,
that was interesting. Sorry, Martin.
Hi, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I think Joe made a great point that the income will come back, and it's very much this season and doing what we can with what's in front of us to get through this season to build into next season. But I think one thing COVID did show is that people really missed our beautiful places. They really missed our museums. They really missed the culture. That's evident in everything we see. So I actually think we've got a very important opportunity right now to start expressing that the fact that many of our shops are income for our charity, or they are income to fund this museum. And the way we tell that story, I think, has always been an opportunity in our Heritage Gift Centre. And I don't think we always do it as well as we can. But I think now's the time to start saying, when you buy that mug, that scarf, or whatever, you're really helping us get back on our feet, get back for next season. And for me, it's how do we develop that story very quickly now, while our customers are coming back, to maybe them put their hand in their pocket a little bit deeper than they might have done, and support us as we get through the tough times. And I think, having seen COVID, I think people will be really happy to do that. We just need to remind them and nudge them slightly.
I strongly agree with that. I think that's right. It reminds me always, I remember the Cutty Sark years ago when there was the fire, and they, you know, thought, oh, there won't be any money for ages, and they were, you know, had to set up all this online giving and things because people do want to help. And I think you're absolutely right, Martin. Being ready for that is, you know. Yeah.
Maybe get a bit proactive and get ahead of the curve with that one as we open our doors to get some much needed income in, for sure.
Yeah, we're seeing that at the moment. I think with the Scottish Cranach Centre that really had a devastating fire at the weekend, destroyed, and the demand, I think, from people wanting to help, and they've immediately been able to set up and look, and hopefully they'll find the funds to recover from that. You can, everybody, if you go and look online, we've been sharing ways that you can support if you wish to do that.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was quite devastating, but they are opening, and as I say, they're looking for help, and we're trying to be positive as a way that they can recover from this. But I think, something that's been really encouraging from this has been that people have really wanted to support culture. Some of our museums that have been brave enough to ask a price for people to attend some of their online events have seen people want to do that, even if you've said just optional donations. They have generated a couple of £100, which has really helped these organisations. So that's something we can take a lot of heart from. And I think leading on quite nicely from that, when Martin's referring to that story that we tell, there's different kinds of stories, both in that encouraging people and how they can support their local museum or the museum that they're visiting, but just wider, that kind of story first approach that museums have been looking to tell through their collections, and thinking about how that can be applied a bit more to the museum shop experience, and in what ways. And perhaps if I could come to Martin first, thinking about some of the practical examples there before Alison could maybe come up and think of that from a product point of view.
Thanks, Nicola. This one's actually really close to my heart, telling stories in heritage shops. And I think it's because I came from such a non-heritage background commercially, and then came into the heritage world retailing. It was amazing to get involved in this. So the practicality, I mean, Culloden telling stories, that the Jacobite theme for me was so easy to establish that one and get it moving, which is great. But I realised that taking the best pieces from your museum and trying to make them bespoke products costs money and time. So for me, thinking about the now where we are and building for next season. These stories don't have to be super complicated stories that we're pulling out one little object in the back of a museum that potentially we're building into a retail range. It's more about where's the quick wins and themes. So for example, the trust shops I developed, the Highland Cow, everyone loves the Highland Cow when they come up to see us, but rather than putting one range of Highland Cows in, I went around and took the 3-4 top products from loads of different suppliers off the shelf and created a theme around Highland Cows. So you had loads of wonderful products just from different suppliers all over Scotland creating that theme. You can expand that further. Most of our sites are in stunning scenery in Scotland surrounded by heather. So for me, there's a whole story there you could be telling around heather, different products from different suppliers in Scotland. We've got the year of coast and waters at the minute. That's a great story to tell. We've got the Gaelic Museum right beside the sea. So for me, suppliers like Hope Blaemire, Cath Waters, Salco Jewellery, that's an amazing little range you could drop into your shop around the theme of coast and waters. Don't even start me on puffins. Again, the ranges, you can go there. So short-term wise, yes, it's lovely we can develop Jacobite themes and stories and invest time and money and ranges to produce. But where we are now, there's some quick wins out there, thinking about where your shop is at the moment in the environment, in the place people are coming to see us, and then building a theme around not just what's in your exhibition, but the place of where you are. So as I say, I'm quite passionate about that one. I love that. I love telling those stories. So something that we could all get after this season for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the last part particularly, I think broadening, I think I said it before actually, sorry to repeat myself, but I think broadening out the storytelling and the opportunities away from exhibitions and kind of, making moments, creating them, is kind of the opportunity there with storytelling. I think the point that was made before about the opportunity around telling the story of what retail contributes to the entire institution, that I think you were making before, Martin. I think that's really strong and really important, and I think that kind of every purchase supports story is a really important one to keep on telling, whether it's literally having it on the packaging, or a little sticker, or talking about it in social media, or if you do have an online shop, making that message really clear. I think I 100% agree. I think that's a very important story to tell. I think around away from the themes per se, but also thinking about your products. They might not be product development, something that you've developed in-house, but it might be somebody local that you've worked with, and I think there is that real opportunity and engaging and impactful story to tell around your selection and who you're working with, and there is this real I think beautiful story to tell about your location, and who it is that you're working with, and I guess also I would say this because I'm very interested in kind of process, but how things are made, that's very interesting, and people don't know necessarily how things are made or why you've chosen them, so that why and how is really an interesting story to tell. I'd say also that kind of ties in with behind the scenes, which I think is really intriguing on a human level. How are you actually reopening? And I think that's something, Joe, particularly, on the kind of slowly in the reopening plans, it's such a lovely thing that we've tried to do here at the RA too, is, how are we actually getting ready and getting ready to welcome you back? We're so happy to have you back. And I think that's again, such a lovely part of the storytelling right now.
I agree. I think we could all talk about storytelling for hours and hours. I think the important thing that's coming through from what Martin and Alison are saying, it's museums used to have a slightly unfortunate habit of these are the stories we want to tell, and perhaps slightly less emphasis on the stories people actually wanted to hear. And I think that comes from a passion about, perhaps some little known area, and that sometimes can be great. But I think always, check, I think what Martin's saying about place, or Alison's saying about, the appetite for how things are made. I think the stories need to connect with why people are shopping with you. And I think it's really important for us to remember, for most of us, that everything that we sell is discretionary. People don't have to buy it. And we've all got houses full of stuff. We don't need more. Well, actually, I haven't, because I've just moved back. But anyway, the point being that if you can understand the motivation for why they visited, they're coming back after a pandemic, or they're visiting a beautiful area of Scotland they've not seen before. That's where the kind of, building a story around, say, I think the Highland Cows is a really good example. It's thinking, what are they here for? And how do I package that and connect it? So I think that's one point. The second point I would make about storytelling is it can be a very practical way of not having to commit too much, because the clever kind of buying that Martin's talking about, for example, where you find things, and what Alison's saying about packaging them and it making it yours, means you don't need to get into frightening big runs of product and all the rest of it. It's your edit. It's your story rather than the product. So those would be my points. Remember, it's a story someone wants to hear, not just that you want to tell it. And also think of it as a way of bringing it alive. An example I often use, but it's a long time ago, is we did an Art Deco show at the V&A, and people were all talking about, you should be doing martini glasses, and we could have developed a martini glass, but much better, we made a little recipe for vodka and something beginning with A, V&A, and that little recipe was in the glass, and that told the story. But they were just glasses you could have bought anywhere. So with packaging and labeling and ideas, you can make something unique to that visit without necessarily having to spend much money at all. So,
yeah, that felt like it was almost referring back to what you said at the start there about listening, and you're talking to and listening to your audience and the stories that they kind of want to hear, and drawing on those connections people have to, if it is Highland. I know for myself, one of my greatest moments ever in my life was the first time I saw a puffin. And I just wandered around and sneaked to the cliff edge to hang over to look down, and they were all nesting. And I still get excited. And now if there's a quality puffin product, I'm very drawn to it.
Yeah. It's turning them and what's right for the moment. We've been doing a lot of storytelling at the moment across the whole organisation, not just retail. We've got a David Hockney exhibition, and we turned that into a sort of campaign around his words, "You can't cancel the spring," and we basically built that up, and just the kind of optimism and excitement that we're all talking about returning, so that you're building a story more about where people are at and what they're looking for than necessarily purely collection based.
Absolutely.
I also think.
Sorry, carry on, Alison.
Sorry. Sorry. I was going to say it's so interesting talking about the listening and the kind of motivations. It's interesting matching that then with the platforms, or the way that the message and the storytelling is reaching the audience, because I guess we've talked about on products, so physical, and also we've talked about digital. So it is that kind of, it comes back to the point I think you were making, Martin, is doing what we can with what we have. And to your point, Joe, it's sort of, softly, do what's right for you. And I think that's also a real opportunity in the how you're reaching people, is if it's just a small offer and you are able to be open physically, then it is a kind of physical storytelling that you're doing, as people go through the actual physical space. If you have the opportunity to be digital also, how are you doing that? Are you kind of tying them together? I find quite interesting, and yeah.
Yeah, when we spoke before, Joe, as well, you'd mentioned about the role of sort of storytelling in sort of seasonal marketing, and how that could help there.
Yes, I suppose that's a sort of extension of what we're talking about. It's something that we're beginning to explore in a lot more detail. I think particularly if you are either one organisation that has a lot of strands of activity, or alternatively, and I suspect some of the people on this call might be this as well, one organisation but with multiple venues or locations, so you've got a lot of stories going on. There's it's tempting to make a bit of a menu. And that can work, but what we're trying to sort of find is ideas, and I think Can't Cancel the Spring would be quite a good example of where we were able to sort of give a kind of marketing touch to the different things. So that might have been kids drawing classes, it might have been invited artists doing online talks, it might have been the phased reopening of the galleries, it might have been a marketing campaign to friends not to leave us, it might have been the cafe menu. We tried to use the story, we tried to use Can't Cancel the Spring, we tried to use bluntly Pink to sort of bring it all together and to say, this is all coming from one place, these are the different aspects of it that you might want to enter into, and it can make it feel, I have to say there's quite a lot of backwards engineering on that, of going, so what's the spring take we're going to take on that? But I think you can build out quite a compelling story, either across, as I say, multiple activity or multiple venues, or different programs at different times, if you try and sort of approach it from a thematic point of view. Light touch. I would never say everything has to fit exactly, but we're certainly working more on that.
Thank you. That's really, I find that really interesting and agree wholeheartedly. Just moving on a little bit, because I think we could talk about storytelling a long time, and just a wee reminder as well that for everybody to please pop any questions that they do have in the Q&A for us to come back to. We'd love to hear your thoughts. But one of the positive aspects over here has been the way the sectors come together collaborating. I know that our museums and heritage organisations across the Highlands, we've started meeting more regularly online. We've collaborated on bigger projects to help extend our reach. And I'm just wondering if there is a role that could have in retail as well, if there are any key benefits or what the challenges are for museums looking to work collaboratively in the retail offering, perhaps firstly in terms of the kind of the product mix, and secondly thinking more about perhaps local collaboration and local artists and makers and things that you could work with. Maybe if I could come to Martin first there.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I think the product mix one's a really interesting question, and it's finding that blend across your shop of what I call off the peg ranges, which you can get from established suppliers, to how much you bespoke to your site, and blending that product mix across the shop is a tricky thing to do, but when done well, it really does drive extra income for your shop, because there's a bit of everything for everybody there. Regarding collaborative working, I think one of the basics that sometimes we overlook because we're such busy lives when we're in our shops and we're in the trenches, as it were, is in actual fact getting out there and going to network with other museum attractions and saying, can I come and see your shop and let me walk around it? And then that spark starts getting united between collaborative work and that, you know what, I think this would work really well in your museum, or this would work really well in mine. And I don't think we do enough of that, and we don't do it because it's life and we're too busy doing the nuts and bolts, as it were. But learning from each other that way, I think, is way more powerful than maybe potentially trying to buy ranges together and collective buying power. It's about the brains behind retail, the best ideas. So sharing those ideas collaboratively, I think that's where we've got a real opportunity. And apologies if you're doing that already, but I just think that we've got more opportunity already to do that.
Absolutely. Alison, would you like to pick up?
Sure. I think particularly, I guess, based on my experience, I can particularly speak to the collaborating with on products, and I think with local communities and makers. And I think it comes back to the point that Martin was making about the mix, but I guess it's a slightly different point, which is, that your product mix and the power of the edit is, not only the pressure of having to develop something exclusive, but actually finding the opportunity to work with people around you, and people that are, whether they're in the UK, whether they're in Scotland, whether they're really local to you, but collaboration in that respect is really, I think, really an opportunity, and it's a way to build and be part of a community, the creative community. And I think can be very strong in retail mixes, propositions.
You did a lot of that at Dundee, Alison. I thought that was such an interesting project, that because it was about establishing a museum and its connection with its neighbours. And I think that link, that collaboration with making, and that was part of the whole reason for the museum being there, was to celebrate local design, well, not local, Scottish design and international design. That was a really interesting where mission really ties back to that collaboration.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. We, a big percentage of the retail range was working with Scottish producers and makers, even local to Dundee. We worked with DC Thompson, we worked with Mackay's for Dundee Marmalade. We also worked with Scottish designers. There were so many of them. Lynn McLaughlin. I can just think of all the lovely faces and hands that went into that initial ranging. But I think back to what Joe's saying, it's interesting starting on a new range with the mission around local design. But I think actually we can all embrace that. I think that is also the wide remit of museums and cultural institutions to have that conversation, to have that engagement, and I think also to support each other. We were talking earlier, Nicola, you were talking about the kind of the support us, and how generous people really are looking for ways to support the creative industries, and we saw that so much last year, and I think it's continuing, and I think that's also how museums can support and be supported by communities. It's kind of two ways, and it's a really I think impactful mark that retail can make in the landscape.
I think there can be a lot of challenges because there can be a natural feeling for us across the sort of the Highlands to collaborate, but that's a lot of practical challenges and a lot of difficulty. But looking at that very local kind of collaboration can really benefit your own site, and also that it helps you keep that kind of unique look which people are coming when they come to visit.
I suppose one thing I would say is, at the risk of sounding deeply uncollaborative, and that's not what I think Martin's point is absolutely right, that it's sharing ideas and best practice. I think we have to be careful that people come to each of us because we're individual and special. And I'm always a little bit wary of anyone or any supplier that says, oh, we do this for everybody. You think, oh, right, okay, then fine. Because actually, I'm joking slightly, but we don't all want to have the same thing. And I think that's where the power of the edit and the locality and the stories, I think you do want to have little surprises and little things that, like any retailer, there's a bit of competition to it, and like, this is new, this is exciting. So I strongly agree with Martin that it's about best brains together and the way we've done things, rather than necessarily a particular supplier or a particular product. I think it's sharing knowledge generally rather than kind of mass producing the same thing.
I loved Alison's points there about collaborative with local suppliers. That was quite close to my heart. I can see you've done that in the V&A wonderfully. I've also found as well that once some of the suppliers start working with you on a local level, they start getting what you want for your specific sites. So rather than presenting, here's our range of wonderful products for the shop, they start getting, actually, hold on, Martin's looking for this, this, and this for that site and that site. And then that changes that dynamic with that supplier, and it starts getting really interesting there. And when it goes back to what Joe said about those minds working together. So I think, yes, collaborative working across museums, but to your point, Alison and Joe, better collaborative working with our suppliers, and they understand more about what individual sites need.
I think that's a good point. That sort of those local connections, but also that peer-to-peer learning across the sector can be really powerful as well. Thank you. Can we just touch briefly a bit on licensing? There's been quite a lot, I guess, in the press and things over the kind of last year around that, and there's been some focus on the potential of it for museum retail collections. I think that's both in relation to sort of image and brand licensing, whether it's looking at their collections or their brand. What are your thoughts in terms of this, in terms of customer engagement, I guess income potential, And drawing, I guess, in conversations I've had previously with Joe and others, that sort of effort versus return, keeping in mind a lot of Highland museums have very small staff teams or even voluntary run. And drawing on your experience here, Joe, if I could come to you first.
I think the first thing I would say, and God, I wish I could see you. I wish I could see who was watching and sort of who was listening. But my one thing I would say is it's really difficult. It's really difficult. It is a lot of work, and it can make great returns, but it not necessarily. I think the analogy I would always make is it's a little bit like sponsorship licensing, in that it's really about what they want. And I think, occasionally there's a fantastic sort of meeting of minds, and you have exactly what the licensor wants to take out to market, but they're quite rare. I am lucky enough to have led one of the biggest licensing programs in the country in terms of museums at the V&A, and it's hard, and that's even with fabulously talented teams and an extremely well-established brand. So I suppose that would be the first thing I would say, is it's not easy. It's not like there's lots of suppliers just waiting to license from you. And I think the two sort of checks I would put on are, if they're doing it as a way of selling you more, some kind of buyback arrangement, I would be wary of that. You'd almost be better just to produce it yourself, because the share in the market is very little. So if they're saying, well, we could produce, 10,000, but you'd need to take 8,000 of them, that's not really licensing. That's a sort of add-on to it's almost more of a kind of wholesale arrangement. That would be one thing, the size of the buyback. And the other would be just generally to be thinking about where your product sits in the outside market. So if you have a great series of images or whatever, what kind of company, what kind of store do you see those in? Because those are the kinds of suppliers to be going to. It's not as simple as just thinking we've got lots of lovely treasures that people want to find. It's hard. And I suppose I don't want that to sound as a downer. I just know that quite a lot of colleagues, say their directors and things, are saying, we should be taking this to market. And I suppose I just like to say it's hard and it's time consuming, and it's not always for a great return, unless you're very, very lucky and have a brand like the V&A, where people buy that for endorsement and it's been established over many years.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, clear answer. And it's something museums already work over capacity, especially the sort of small to medium ones. And so it's a really good consideration. Unless there's something that comes up, then it's possibly. Do Alison or Martin have anything to kind of add to that? Or?
I think Joe's all over this. She's answered that one perfectly. There's so much more low hanging at the minute that there's bigger priorities at the minute for sure. It's a good answer. It's not a shortcut to wealth. I think that's what we need to be telling our directors. It needs to be something that the licensee can take to market, and they're all changing their brands, and their offers season after season. It's not like it used to be, where there were long-term relationships where a nice couple of percent could make a difference for everybody. Everybody's marketing new lines every year. It's hard work.
I would say, I don't have anywhere near the experience, but I guess to Joe's point about, if you do go down it, it's about thinking where they'll be in the marketplace and what kind of, what kind of brand, I think also what kind of product. I think that is very time consuming also, because obviously it's not your product, but also it's that match of values and also a material value, not only a material financial value. And I guess I would just, I think on the image licensing, particularly same thing. I think that particularly around resourcing and all the work that takes, asset management systems, keywording. I think about all of the hard work that goes into image licensing, and then other kind of offshoots of that, like print on demand. And I think, you know, enticing as it might be, it also, I think, takes so much work, even with a, as you were saying, Joe, even with a big team, or not a big team, but a team. It's quite difficult.
Having been so negative, perhaps we should say, if some fabulous, great licensee turns up on your doorstep and offers lots of money, yes, go for that. But
yeah,
it just doesn't happen very often. Yeah.
It's sort of pursuing it and putting in a lot of time, because it's unlikely that in a sort of smaller museum that you're going to have somebody that knows a lot about this to really make it. So therefore, adding it to another skills where you're perhaps already the curator, fundraiser, marketeer is not something to spend a lot of time on. However, as you say, if somebody comes up at your door begging for something, then always take advantage of it.
And also, as you just go around, I sometimes think, you know, occasionally when you back to Martin's point about being out there and looking at the business, you know, sometimes you can be in a, I don't know, a card shop or you know, any kind of store and think, actually, I bet they'd be interested in what we've got there. But it's back to that thing of knowing, and then I would just pick up the phone and say, you know, would you be interested in licensing anything from us? You know, but it's knowing where, to Alison's point, where it would sit in its end market. So, you know, having said, you know, be wary of it. If there's an opportunity, of course, you know, chase it.
But I think that's the delicate thing that all of us, you know, that's what we're all trying to do, is balance that opportunity versus, you know, and the considerations. I guess that's the.
Great, thank you. We've had a great question from Mary McMullen, saying thank you all to the speakers for a really interesting conversation this morning. She would like to ask everyone if they have any experience of commissioning work or product development with designers working directly from the museum collections to create new products for retail. Perhaps Alison, you'd be good to come to first there. Yeah.
Sure. I was thanks, Mary, for the question. I'll try to answer it best I can. I was actually just recently looking at a project that I worked at on when I was at the V&A in South Kensington, and it was working with Rob Ryan, who's an artist, and it was taking inspiration from the collection. So we have these lovely objects in the collection called loving cups. That are these extraordinary cups with two handles, and they're meant to be either a gift or shared sort of drinking vessel at weddings or other celebrations historically. And so that was a really lovely experience where it was actually tying together part of the collection and working with an artist to make an in-house product, kind of V&A product. I would say that one was quite interesting because we only did an edition, a certain number of them. And I thought that was actually quite powerful in a lot of ways. I mean, I do actually currently work in editions, so I would probably say this, but you know, you don't have to make thousands and thousands of something. Actually, there's a lot of strength in just working on a finite project, and if it's successful, learning from its successes. What was it about it that, you know, what were the motivations that we captured and made this product successful? Price point, look, feel, how is it packaged, working with that artist, the designer. So there's a lot of learnings you can take from that and then work on another project. So you don't, if that answers the question, I hope it does.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's a good sort of tip in there as well about sort of being able to maybe test it first with a small run, and using that as a learning experience as well. Joe and Martin, would you have anything to add?
For Mary's question, I think we've touched on a wee bit about working with local suppliers, and for me, they might not necessarily be designers per se, but people like Crawford Henderson, which I think Alison worked with in the V&A with their recycled leather, and him putting his design ideas onto it. Culloden with great success with a jewellery designer called Laura Cook, who we were able to take sustainably heather from the battlefield and put it into jewellery. So people were taking a little bit of the heather and the battlefield away. So again, working with that local designer, they really then understand what products that you're looking for to get into your particular heritage shops. I think that's the theme I think we're pulling out here, Mary. So hopefully that answers your question. There's loads of scope for that, and that sometimes makes some of your best products.
That's a lovely example. It's taking a little bit of the heart with you as well. Sorry, Alison. Yeah.
I would add to that and say also that actually designers and artists find your collections to be very interesting quite often. So just coming back around, to your question, Mary, I think you're talking about the collections as well as working with designers. That is the power of working together, is that actually you're all inspired by each other. Hopefully, that's when the kind of magic happens.
I love those moments of connection when you see a product or a designer of the kind, and you also have an artist or an image in mind, and you think that's perfect. That's just the right material with the right sensibility. That's a really nice feeling.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jo. Could I ask you to think of some of the key challenges that current museum shops have, and perhaps if you could each maybe give sort of 3 top tips that you would give to help people sort of improve their museum experience? What your 3 best things you would pass on from your experience? I'll come to Alison first because she's smiling so broadly.
I was just trying to remember 3 top tips. Well, I don't have to remember them. I think there's some things that we've already picked up on, and I would just reiterate. I think the power of the edit is one of them. I think also we touched on the mix, and I guess it's around also price point and sort of as much as volume and value, and it's that kind of mix. And I guess I would say that the collaboration and being part of your own community, the connections is my 3rd one.
Perfect, thank you. Jo?
I suppose I would say confidence. Have the confidence of your convictions and knowing what it is you want to range. I think the most common problem I see in other stores is over ranging, where you can see somebody's thought, oh, well, we should try this, we should try that, and maybe we'll pop in a bit of that. And actually, I like orange, but she likes purple, and it doesn't play out well. Stick to your guns would be one. The second would be, don't feel that you have to get into product development necessarily, and what Martin was saying about the cows or anything. Clever buying, the power of the edit. Don't think there's a sort of secret way that big places are doing things that you can't afford to do. You can make something really great without doing product development. And I think the third one would just be, find your own voice. Don't look too much to left and right. Think about what people want from you. Don't fall into kind of cliches and things like that, but just come up with something really original. So confidence, discipline, and your own voice would be my 3.
Martin?
I think my first one would be take 5. So with your retail manager, operations manager, whatever, is literally find 5 minutes when your heritage shop is busy and just stand there and watch people. It's great fun. So when they come in the door, do they go left or do they go right? What's the first thing they do when they come in? When they're in the shop, what are they picking up? What are they putting down? Where are they putting it back? Just go and watch what your customers are doing for 5 minutes. It gives you pile of information about what to do in your shop. It's wonderful, and it's good fun as well. Everyone loves people watching, so that's the first one. Second for me is be brave and try and move away in places in your shop from category merchandising. Many of the places I go to, here's the scarves, here's your mugs, here's your etc. Try and think about how you merchandise your shop out of category and into themes. I think that's really strong and it really helps. And then Jo mentioned it briefly about SKU count and clutter. For me, less is more every time. We need to help our customers at time make up their mind of what to purchase. And the way we do that is by not giving them too much choice and keeping the product in the right place. So similar thread there to Jo. So they're my top 3 tips for what they're worth.
There's some big nods there for that final point there. So I think that comes as a really good, strong one. Just as we get close to the end, if anybody's got any final question, please do pop it in. But to help us try and end on quite a positive note, we sort of also started thinking about the story that retail could tell in terms of people wanting to support their local culture and heritage, and thinking about the role that can play in recovery. And we've seen our communities really miss access to their cultural experiences. And we've seen a huge increase in demand for history and heritage content, both online and on our TVs. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what role you feel that our heritage organisations, museums could play in our recovery. Jo.
I suppose we've talked about many of them, I guess, through this morning about things people missed, the kind of physicality, to state the obvious, of coming back. We got a letter from one of our friends saying they'd been up and looked through the gates every day while we were shut. So there's a sort of thing about the reconnection and the physicality and the warmth of the welcome that you can give. I suppose the other thing that it's certainly done for us, and I suspect for many of us, has made us think about our local market differently. A lot of us are very reliant either on tourism or particular audiences, and I think one of this thing this has done for all of us in every way is make us think about who's right there, and both the pride and wanting to support it, but also just appreciating what's on our doorstep. And I think that's a really important one that I had not anticipated. But it's really making me think about the other people, even as somewhere as busy as Piccadilly. Who's living there, who's next door, where are the flats, what are the other shops doing, and thinking about that localness. Those would be the two ways I would do it. It's the physicality and the focus on the local, hyper local, as we're all taught to call it. But it's new and it's interesting for me.
Thanks, Jo. Martin?
I think for recovery wise, we've actually got an amazing opportunity at the moment. So in the Highlands of Scotland, we've got stay vacations. We've got loads of guests coming to visit us who would normally not have come to Scotland. And I think we've got this amazing opportunity now to dazzle them in our shops, dazzle them in our heritage centres, dazzle them and look after them and make them feel special, so that hopefully next year they think about, let's nip back up to Scotland again. It was a cracking time. So it's a real opportunity for us here in the Highlands to make the most of it at the minute.
Brilliant. That's a really good point. Alison?
I would just almost repeat, though I probably don't have to. But I think it's about the connections, and we're all so happy. When we're able to be open, we're so happy to be open, and when we're open, people are so happy that we are open. And it's that kind of the two-way. That it goes both ways. And I think it's a very positive feeling in kind of a a very not necessarily positive time all the time. So I think bright light.
Thank you. I think that's a really positive note for us to end on, that our audiences have really missed us and they want to support us, and telling that story, listening to them, hearing the stories that they want to hear. And I think some of the other top tips that we've shared today around having confidence over what we want, those stories we want to tell. And I'm getting distracted by all the reminders in the chat. And I think thinking of that local collaboration, really trying to have that unique story to tell in our own locations, being confident in how we tell that, and getting support from our peer-to-peer networks as well. There's a lot of really, really good messages that you have shared with our audience today. So thank you very much. Thank you to Mary also for her question. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.